Hello, and welcome to the Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. Hi, I'm Bela Musitz.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
Hey, Mike, before we dive into this episode, I want to give another shout out to our newest Patreon supporter, Paul. Thank you so much for supporting the podcast. We really appreciate it. If you'd also like to support the podcast, it's really easy now via Patreon. Just go to patreon.com/sailingtheeast. So today's guest on the podcast is Joe Hagen. This is Joe's third appearance on the podcast. He was here on episode 12 and then again in a two-part series, episode 44 and 45. Joe is a longtime sailor, and after retiring from the corporate life several years ago, he started Offshore Adventure Sailing. At Offshore Adventure Sailing, Joe takes folks out on multiple day ocean passages. In this episode, Joe and I discuss his adventures this past summer and spring, which is the summer of 2022, and taking his boat up to Nashville via the Tom Tom Canal.
So, Bela, I've always enjoyed the conversations with Joe, and I hope this kind of turns into an annual routine, right? Getting his update. Here's what he's doing. He's really got this interesting business, and I like his approach to business, which he'll talk about, I think, in the interview a little bit. And I think he's got a really interesting approach to life, and kind of sailing, I guess, is the glue that holds all this together. But I'm looking forward to the conversation. I'm looking forward to hearing what Joe's been up to this year and what his plans are for the coming sailing season. So let's go ahead and give it a listen.
Hey, Joe, how are you?
I'm great. Hope you had a wonderful holiday and you're preparing for a happy new year.
Yes. As we record this between Christmas and New Year's, it was pretty good. We spent Christmas at, I have two sons and they're both married. We spent Christmas Eve and Christmas Day at their house. And then my other son and his wife and their daughter are coming tomorrow night to be with us through New Year's. So
outstanding. Nice. Are you doing any skiing?
Oh yeah. Yep. Skied yesterday. I'm going to ski tomorrow. So it's been sort of a not great season. We haven't had a lot of cold weather. We haven't had consistent cold weather.
Yeah.
And we've only had one snowstorm, and then about 6 days after that snowstorm, we had a big rainstorm. So
But you had some bad weather in this recent little cold spell, right?
We did not get a lot of snow out of that. That's the western part of New York State.
Yeah, okay. And that's lake effect snow, I guess.
That's lake effect for the most part. That's right. Yeah, if only the mountains that I ski in were another 150 miles further west, it would be the best skiing in the world for early season with the lake effect, but it doesn't quite reach the mountains here.
Yeah, where do you ski?
At a place called Gore.
Okay.
Which is, let's see, probably 2 hours north of Albany, hour and a half north of Albany, New York. Yeah.
Close to the Adirondacks.
It's in the Adirondacks. Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Outstanding.
Yeah. So it's south of Lake Placid, north of Albany.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
I used to ski at I think it was called Spectator Mountain. Is there such a place? You ever heard of that?
Speculator.
Okay.
Yep. In the town of Speculator. In the Adirondacks. Yeah.
Is that it? Okay.
Yeah, I think so.
I lived as a child in Rome, New York. And so we skied at that resort, if that makes any sense, because I don't know my geography well.
Yeah, no, that would make sense. A lot of those little ski areas have vanished.
Yeah.
It's gotten really difficult. The capital expenditures required to run a ski area these days has made it really challenging for the little guys.
Yeah. Well.
Yeah.
The world changes.
Let's talk sailing. So
sailing.
I was trying to remember. You were on the podcast about a year ago. And actually 2 episodes we did. I looked it up. So you were in episode 46 and 47. And this episode is going to be episode 74. So
wow. Say, we're repeating some of the same numerals.
What wait a minute. I misspoke. We're going to be episode 75. I wrote it down incorrect. Yeah, we're going to be episode 75, just to break up the numeral thing there. Yeah.
Yeah. Very good.
So, and remind people, maybe folks who didn't listen to the first 2 episodes that you were on, sort of what you do?
I sail as much and as often as I can. I have a little charter business called Offshore Adventure Sailing. And the goal of this, my mission with this little venture is to give people the opportunity to get the real experience of sailing offshore. I've got a smallish boat. It's well found, well equipped, and but it's nothing elaborate. And so we get small groups of people, never more than 4, and do passages. Usually the U.S. East Coast plus the Bahamas and the Western Caribbean has been our sort of little beat so far.
And a typical trip is how long? How many days?
Typically 6 to 10 days. We've done them a little longer and a little shorter, but they're generally in that range. It's just enough to really feel like you're out there,
So who would sort of be the sweet spot for your customer? Who's sort of the ideal crewmate that comes aboard your boat?
Most of the people who sail with me have some sailing experience. They may own a boat on an inland lake or on the coast, but they don't feel like that boat is ready to take offshore, or maybe they don't feel that they themselves are ready to go offshore. And so this is an opportunity to go out in a boat well prepared for offshore sailing with people who have good experience. And so the demographics are really varied from 18 to 80. I think I've had an 80-year-old, and typically professional people in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Yeah. So men and women.
Yeah. And is there like a structured curriculum you go through?
No, I tell people I resist. Some of the people who do similar things to me call it the sail training.
Yes.
I don't like that term because I don't have a curriculum. I'm not trying to teach people. People will learn.
Sure.
I'm just trying to give them the experience. And there's no curriculum. There's no certificate at the end. There's no test. We're just going to get out there, a small group of people, and sail a blue water sailboat from point A to point B and have a great time on the way.
Yeah. Yeah. So if I asked half a dozen folks who had been on one of your passages, what would they say that was the best thing they learned or the best thing about the passage?
Well, it's pretty varied. I think most people are just completely stunned by, I don't want to sound silly here, but just like the awesomeness of nature. I mean, the sky is amazing. The bioluminescence is amazing. The sea can be both beautiful and terrifying. You can't go sailing offshore and not be changed by it. That's been my experience.
Yeah, no, that's a great response for sure. Yeah, it is pretty awesome, right? If you enjoy nature and you enjoy taking nature in, being on a passage, and for me particularly overnight passages are just unbelievable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I absolutely love it. Back to your question about the customer, the people who join me, they tend to be adventurous people, interesting people. They're people who, want to go out and do something a little bit out of the ordinary, break up the routine,
Yeah. So I remember last time we talked, you had sort of some loose plans for what your sailing itinerary was going to be this past summer, so the summer of 2022. And so how did that pan out? Where did you end up going?
Well, it was a short but wonderful season. We started in Charleston, South Carolina, where I had hauled the boat for the winter to do a little refit. And we left Charleston in early March and sailed down the coast to Miami. That was our first leg. So that took, trying to remember, 8 or 10 days, I think. And then across to the Bahamas. You know, one of the great things about the East Coast is it gives you access to other places.
Yeah, sure does.
And the Bahamas is an obvious one. It seems
Yeah.
like the Bahamas is on the way to everything. So we went from Miami to Nassau by way of Isla Mirada, Florida, and the Biminis in the Bahamas, and then spent about a month doing trips in the Bahamas. We went from Nassau up to Eleuthera, through Current Cut to the south part of Eleuthera, or the eastern part of Eleuthera, and then down to Cat Island, and ultimately to Georgetown in Exuma. Now, this is tropical, gorgeous water. Have you spent time sailing the Bahamas at all?
I have not. No, it's
Oh
on
my
my
gosh.
bucket list.
It's fabulous. And then we did a trip from Georgetown back to Florida, about a 10-day trip.
Yeah.
Sort of island hopping for 3 or 4 days, and then a couple of overnight passages, and then a long 2 or 3 day passage all the way back to Florida. It was great. And then we went south through the Keys to Key West, and from Key West across the Gulf up to Pensacola, Florida. And then my wife and I got on the boat in Pensacola and motored the boat 910 miles up the Tennessee Tom Bigby waterway to Nashville, Tennessee, which is where I live.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So we arrived in Nashville in early June. So all of that sailing took place in 3 months. And then I've had the boat close to my house here since June. And on this coming Monday, in just a few days, I'm leaving to go back south to get back to blue water again.
Oh, wow. Was that your first experience up a river, so to speak?
I'm up a creek a lot. No, I have done the Tom Bigby. Well, actually, it was only the second time I've done the whole thing. Mm-hmm. It's a remarkable waterway. I mean, it's a feat of engineering. First of all, it crosses a mountain, a divide, which is amazing. And then it's a bunch of rivers connected together. It's beautiful. We saw bears. I mean, who would think you'd see bears along the river in Alabama of all places? But we did. It's gorgeous, and I'm not big on motoring. We motored for 13 straight days, 13 long days. And my mind was sort of just numb from listening to the drone of the motor. But it was gorgeous, and it was interesting, and it was memorable.
Sure.
So, yeah.
Now, the sort of inland waterways up here in New England, for the most part, you have to take the mast down because there's a lot of low bridges. Do you have that same challenge?
No. I think the lowest bridge is 52 feet, and my mast is 50. So we squeezed under a few, but we got through all of them, and the mast is still up.
All right. That's
good. The trip down is going to be, of course, a lot more water and the potential for floods. So we'll see how it goes on the way down.
Yeah. Wow. And so what do you have planned for this summer?
Well, I've got a schedule laid out through April. So we're going to go from Pensacola to Key West to Nassau to Georgetowns. We're back in the Bahamas, Georgetown, Exumas. From Georgetown to Providenciales in the Turks and Caicos, which is a beautiful, beautiful area. It's remote. It's deep water. You often think of the Bahamas as being shallow, but this is deep water with islands 20, 40, 50 miles apart. So they're long days or even overnight sails between the islands. Upwind, because you're going in a southeasterly direction.
Yeah.
And then you get to Turks and Caicos, which is another one of these, island paradises, and from there to Grand Cayman, there's a long passage south of Cuba. And we may make a stop in Cuba. And from Caymans to Isla Mujeres, Mexico.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, which is a place I've been to twice before. It's just wonderful. And then I will add some trips after that, but I've not yet finalized my plans beyond the end of April.
Yeah.
Well, that's it.
So, when I typically go down to the boat, we sort of get there, I look at the weather, and then I sort of figure out where I'm going to go for the next 2 or 3 days. So there's planning involved, but there's no schedule.
Yeah.
And in your business, you sort of have to, number one, have a plan, because people need to sign up for these things. They sort of need to have a beginning date and an end date.
Right.
And so how do you sort of manage that? How does that sort of work?
Yeah, well, that's a good question, because every sailor knows you should never sail to a schedule, but I sail to a schedule. And the secret is that my schedule is so padded. I figure out how long it will take to go from point A to point B. As an example, we've got a trip coming up. It starts in about a month from Pensacola, Florida to Key West. That's about 450 miles, 400 miles, something like that. And in good conditions, you can do that in like 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
But I schedule 10 because I want plenty of margin to wait for weather. We'll sit and wait for it if we have to. We'll do some coastal cruising while we're waiting for a front to pass. If we find ourselves with time to kill at the end of a trip, there's lots of places to go to, the Dry Tortugas, the Everglades. So we fill the time, but we make sure we have lots of time to not get ourselves in trouble, because I'm not going to sail in bad weather. Even if we don't leave, we're not going to leave.
Yeah. Well, I'm with you. It's like, particularly now that I'm retired, I don't ski in bad weather. I don't sail in bad weather.
That's no fun. Why do it? No.
Why? I don't have to. So why would I?
Exactly.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah. So people look at my schedule and think it's really fast. Wow, you're going from Pensacola, Florida to the Bahamas, the Turks and Caicos, Cayman Islands, and Mexico, and you're doing all that in 3 months. But it's not that hard.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, when you get to a place, unlike maybe someone who's cruising with their family, you're not spending 2 or 3 weeks at that one location.
Right.
So that's the difference, right? So that's why it seems fast.
Of course. I mean, my wife and I took a trip several years ago where we were gone for 15 months, and we would sail to a place, and it was a place we'd never been before, and we really wanted to get to know it, and we'd stay there for 2 or 3 weeks. And
sure,
that's just magical. But that's not what I'm doing now. I'm trying to go sailing.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
So one of the questions I had for you is, when you do these sort of offshore passages, can you talk a little bit about the safety things that you think about, from crew briefings about safety to the types of equipment you have on board?
Sure. I do a little safety briefing when people come aboard at the beginning of a passage, and I talk about lots of things, but there's 3 big things. One is fire, which is a horrible, horrible thing. It's like a black swan thing, right? It's unlikely, but if it does happen, it's terrible. Number 2, illness or injury to a crew person. And 3, a man overboard situation.
Yeah.
And I've got protocols on the boat for all of those things. And I have the equipment on board, everything from firefighting equipment to first aid equipment to tethers and PFDs and jack lines and all of that stuff to make sure people stay safe. I find that people don't have any hesitancy to do the right thing. Here's the only thing that people do that I wish they wouldn't. And you're probably going to want to edit this out because people give me a hard time for this, but I ask people not to pee off the boat. I mean, if we're at anchor and it's a beautiful, calm day, sure, fine. But if we're underway, why take that risk?
Yeah.
So that's the only thing that I'm a little idiosyncratic about.
I think someone else I spoke to on this podcast cited some statistic that some fairly significant percentage of man overboards are people peeing off the stern of the boat while underway.
Well, they say that 73% of all statistics are made up on the spot in order to make a point.
Yeah, I heard that. So, well, if that's your biggest non-compliance thing that you have going on with your crews, I think you're doing pretty good, Joe.
I guess so. Yeah. I got no complaint. I've got a great crew.
Yeah. And so talk to me a little bit about, you got EPIRB, you have life raft, go through some of that stuff.
EPIRB, life raft. In fact, I'm about to replace my life raft. I've got a couple of EPIRBs. I've got everybody wears a PFD. People don't wear it down below, of course. And they don't necessarily have to wear it during the daytime when they're in the cockpit. But when we're leaving, when we leave the cockpit, when it's nighttime, when it's rough seas, PFD's on with tethers and jack lines if you leave the cockpit. We try to rig the boat at before dark so that we don't have to leave the cockpit in the dark at all. Now, we still occasionally do, but honestly, we usually don't ever have to leave the cockpit during the nighttime. We'll reef, even if it isn't required, because I don't want to have to at 2 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
And I have rules about if you do leave the cockpit, somebody's got to be watching you. You can't be alone on watch and decide you're going to go to the mast and reef. That's not wise.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So speaking of watches, how do you run watches?
It depends on the crew. I have done 2-hour watches, 3-hour watches, 4-hour watches, even 6-hour watches during the daytime occasionally. We've done overlapping watches where, you come on before the previous person's watch is over and the next person comes on before your watch is over. And I've done double-handed watches. It really just depends on the comfort level and the, experience of the people that I'm with. So it's not one fixed, not one way or, all the time. And that goes for everything on the boat. I'm not doing champagne cruises. This is just a small group of people trying to get from A to B, and everybody's got to pitch in and do the work. And everybody's got to handle sails and helm the boat and navigate and keep the logbook and even prepare meals. And so, some people like to do things, so they gravitate towards certain tasks more than others. Well, it just works out, when you've got a small group of people working towards a common goal, like getting from point A to point B on a sailboat, it sort of focuses the mind and everybody just it always works. I don't know why, but it always works.
Yeah, it's remarkable, isn't it?
It's great.
Yeah. Yeah, when people sort of clearly understand the goal, and they have good feedback to see how they're doing it towards that goal.
Right.
It works.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it does. It does. And you can't go through an experience like that and not sort of, it's kind of a bonding experience. You know, you end up, it's like everybody I've ever sailed with is like a friend. I mean, really.
Yeah. So I know when I've done passages on other people's boats, I was a crew member, I sleep like a baby. I just go out and I sleep.
Yeah.
When I'm the captain and we're doing passages, I have a hard time sleeping. Maybe, I don't know why. What's your experience with that?
I don't usually have trouble. I can think of a couple of occasions where I would have liked to have been able to sleep more, but I didn't feel like I could or should. But that's really rare.
Yeah.
The boat is a good, solid boat. We don't sail in bad weather. And, I've got all the equipment on board. That for the most part, the boat does the sailing, right? And even when you're on watch, what you're really doing is you're just sort of monitoring things, right? You're looking around to see that there's no boats, although, we've also got AIS systems that'll tell you if there's any sizable boats near you. You're making sure you're going in more or less the right direction, but we've got autopilot, and I'm about to install a hydrovane, which is a wind steering system. So it's not typically, for me, a stressful situation. I sleep like a baby.
Well, that's good. I think it's just for me, the psychological added responsibility of I'm in charge.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be in charge. That I sleep, but I don't sleep as well as when I'm a crew member. So do you have a sort of rules? Let's say it's night watch, right? It's nighttime.
Yeah.
You're not on a watch. You're down below sleeping. What are your rules for people to come and wake you up?
Basically, if you ever have any question, any hesitation about anything, wake me up. Even if you're in doubt about whether or not you have a question, wake me up.
Okay.
And let's talk about it, because I'd just rather and wake me up early. Don't wake me up saying, well, I can wait 10 more minutes, and then if such and such doesn't change, then I'll wake him up. No, wake me up now.
Okay.
So,
but do you have any hard fast rules, like, if there's another ship on the horizon, or, we got to change course because of something? Or is it just, you just respect
really.
People's judgment?
Yeah. I try not to have too many rules. I try to just make sure people understand what we're doing and what's at stake.
Yeah.
Because when you're on watch, you've got responsibility for the boat and the crew. The crew first, of course.
Yeah.
And everybody, we're not out there joking around. We're having a good time, but we're not playing.
Yeah. So do you use a weather router, Joe?
When I'm in South Florida and the Bahamas, I listen to Chris Parker on the SSB radio, right? On occasion, I have hired him to give me customized weather forecasts. But that's a peculiar situation. Like, I did that once when I was doing a solo passage from the Caymans to Key West. But most of the time, we get the weather every day, and we listen to Chris Parker on the SSB, and we kind of do our own weather routing.
Yeah. Very nice. And when this is a question I often think about. When I do passages, and again, this is one of the nice things about the East Coast, is I may be doing, New York City to Baltimore,
Yeah.
but I have every 20 or 30 or 40 miles, I have exit points that I can,
Sure.
I can go into a harbor.
Yeah.
And when I sort of do a passage, I sort of make a route sheet for myself on a piece of paper
Yeah.
that has all of them sort of written down, mileage, et cetera, so that if okay, someone got hurt or I have an equipment failure or all of a sudden the weather's turning bad,
Sure.
okay, boom, I can get into this harbor. I know where to go. I have it already sort of laid out in what I call a route sheet.
Yeah.
How do you think about stuff like that?
Well, no, I always have a plan B and a plan C.
Yeah.
For just that situation. When we did the trip from Charleston down to Miami, we really needed plan B and C, because we're there's like seven or 8 degrees of latitude difference between Charleston and Miami, and that means a huge difference in the weather. And this is on one trip. And so, you start out, we went out the Edisto River there just south of Charleston and went down a day or two. And then the weather started to look like, it could get a little uncomfortable and maybe we don't really want to be out here. So we ducked into, I can't remember the inlet, but down near Savannah, So, you just have to be prepared and you have to have a sort of a plan, at least in your head, as to what to do if things don't work out right. So, yeah.
I always find those things to be, number one, comforting for me.
Yes.
But also sort of when I have to use it and it's maybe a slightly more stressful situation, since I've thought it through and in my case written some of that down, it makes it flow easier.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I don't usually write it down, but I've got it in my head, and we always do a chart briefing at the beginning of a trip, and we'll talk about this. Here's where we're starting, here's where we're going, and if we need to or we want to, and if we have time, we'll go here or here or here,
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Hey, so remind listeners to again what the boat is, what your vessel is.
Yeah, it's a Cabo Rico 34, which is a it's a Costa Rica, built in Costa Rica in 1989. The designer's name escapes me suddenly. Well-known designer, but anyway, it's a cutter-rigged sloop, about 18,000 pounds, 37 feet overall length, not counting the davits, which make it like 42. But yeah, it's a small boat, and I'm sort of infatuated with her.
Yeah, they're beautiful boats. I've seen several, and they're beautiful boats.
Yeah, I mean, I just love this boat. My wife loves this boat, and having it here at home this past summer, it's never been inland.
Yes.
So it's in fresh water this summer. I don't think it knows what to do. But it's been close to home, and it's too heavy of a boat really to be a lake boat.
Yeah.
So we haven't really sailed it very much, but we've done a lot of work on it and been able to do chores that we can't do when it's far away, because that's typically what we'll do during hurricane season, is put the boat up, in Florida somewhere or on the East Coast somewhere, and then we're flying there for a few days and doing work on it. But that's expensive and it takes a lot of time, and having it home, we're able to do projects like replacing the cushions in the salon and electronics upgrades and things like that. So it's been great.
Yeah, that is great. So if people want to find out more about offshore adventure sailing, how do they do that?
Oh, well, the website, www.offshoreadventuresailing.com. Yeah, I've got our planned trips, and I've got some blog posts up there telling stories about some of the trips that we've done, and frequently asked questions and things like that. So, yeah.
And so your schedule's up there, and if I wanted to book a trip with you, that's the best place to get started?
Yeah, absolutely. I have I basically don't have any openings except for one on the trip from Pensacola to Key West in early February. But I'm going to be adding trips in May. They will be May trips. I'll add them before May. So I haven't decided where to go.
Yeah.
That's the nice thing about this, man. I can just where do I want to go? And I wonder if anybody else wants to go, and we'll see.
Yeah, you can usually, in a world this big, you can usually find, 3 or 4 other people who are willing to go along.
I tell you what, I have met just some of the greatest people. It's just been great.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons I do this podcast is I get to talk to wonderful, nice people like you, right? And I do my entrepreneurship podcast as well, and I get to talk to all these interesting people that normally I wouldn't get to interact with. So it's fabulous.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I admire what you're doing.
Yeah. So is there something I didn't ask you that I should have, or something else you'd like to share with the audience, Joe?
No, I don't think so. I know the focus of your of this podcast is the East Coast. I would just comment that a lot of the people who travel on the East Coast, of course, we went to Maine in 2021, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But a lot of the people are traveling up and down the coast, and many of them are heading to the Caribbean or at least the Bahamas. And I think there are people that have some interest in those destinations.
Oh, absolutely.
So,
and I view the Bahamas for sure, and even the Caribbean, Gulf of Mexico, as part of the East Coast. It's sort of like east of the Mississippi, and sort of west of Bermuda.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's sort of the East Coast.
Of course, going to the Bermuda, you're going to leave from the U.S. East Coast almost all the time. I mean, some people live from the Caribbean, but yeah. Actually, Bermuda is kind of interesting because you can reach it from anywhere on the U.S. East Coast. From Maine, go south. From Florida, you go north. From Chesapeake, you go east. Yeah. And it's about the same distance from all of those destinations.
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's. I remember looking at that once on a globe and going, oh, this is about the same distance from all these places.
Yeah, I know. I have not been there, but I need to go.
Yeah. Well, sounds like another trip.
There you go.
Sounds like another trip.
Yeah.
Well, every year, or not every year, but they have the Newport to Bermuda race.
Yeah.
They just did that this past summer. Was Newport to Bermuda, and there was 2 boats from the marina that participated in that.
Yeah, you've got your boat in Narragansett Bay, right?
That's right.
Paradox.
Yeah. So, all right, Joe. Thank you very much for being on the podcast.
Great to catch up with you, Vala.
Yeah, it's always good to see you, and we'll do this again next winter and get a report on how this past summer went.
Outstanding. This is going to be a good year. I can tell.
Yeah, absolutely, it will be. Yeah, no reason for it not to be.
Right. I'm going to do a lot of sailing. I hope you do too.
Yeah, I hope so too. Thanks, Joe.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Well, Bela, what a fascinating conversation. And you and Joe definitely approach some elements of sailing differently, I've noticed. But I really enjoy the contrast in your philosophies. And there's also, I think you have a common core of similarities too. What do you think are the important takeaways from the conversation you had with Joe?
Oh, well, Mike, wait, you can't put something like that out and leave us hanging. So you got to talk about the differences here, because I'm interested for sure.
All right. I think you approach sailing. So I think I'm more like Joe. I kind of have this kind of a little more managerial and just, hey, I'll set a plan and everything will go right. You, my friend, are an engineer through and through. And I love this about you, right? But all of your written list and all of your, right, the elements of measuring everything and double checking and going back and forth and, right, all this. And I love this about you. But I think these are two completely different approaches, right, to what you're doing. I mean, safety is important, right? And he always has the plan. It's up here in his head, right? I get it. Right. But you don't leave anything like that to chance. You are triple sure that everything is written down in ink, right? And located in 3 different places on the boat, right? And everybody knows where it is, right? And I this is why I trust you as a human being, right? This is not a negative thing, but I think that there's a difference in approach. Yeah.
Yes. And they're both valid, they both work great. Right. And
absolutely,
I tend to forget stuff as I've gotten older. So I find that I have to write it down.
Absolutely true. And so it's knowing your own strengths and weaknesses too.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think Joe's business here, right, or going sailing with Joe, is a great way to experience blue water sailing. And by blue water sailing, I mean fundamentally being out of sight of land. So you're far enough offshore that you have ocean swells, you can't see land, and you're doing a multi-day trip. So in a multi-day trip, you get to experience things that you don't experience when you go out for a 6-hour sail during the day and you're back at the dock at night, right? You get to experience taking watches, which means some people are sleeping, and if you're on watch, you're sort of responsible for things on the boat. So that sort of opens your eyes to a whole bunch of things that you may normally not sort of pay attention to or not even see, because now all of a sudden you have this responsibility that you're steering the boat, and you're responsible for the crew that's sleeping and stuff. You have this great experience of actually sailing at night, which to me is just it's one of the great things about doing these multi-day passages, is being on watch from midnight to 3 a.m, or from 3 a.m to 6 or whatever, and watching the sunrise come up, or just being in awe of all the stars that you can see when there's no other light around for 50 miles and stuff. So I think that's what you get in these multi-day trips, and you think about, okay, how to prepare meals while we're underway. How do I walk around the boat? Am I going to get seasick? So you get to experience all these things. So I think that's a really cool thing. And I think the other nice thing about what Joe does is it's not a course. Like he said, he doesn't have a curriculum that he goes through. And I've taken American Sailing Association courses, and they clearly have a curriculum, and they're like, when you and I teach, we sort of have a schedule in mind. We got to get through this stuff in the next 4 hours. And I think this is sort of more experiential. I think than sort of, okay, we're gonna go through these specific things that I have. So that's sort of my summary of what I think he does, and I think there's a lot of value to it. I really like Joe. I've gotten to know him a little bit, I think if you at all have any thoughts about doing some blue water sailing multi-day trips, this is a great way to get your feet wet.
Yeah, learning by doing, right? And it is really valuable. And you need somebody who has both the expertise and I think this kind of teaching mentality that Joe seems to have, right? To take every moment and turn it into a lesson, or to take a mistake and turn it into a lesson. And I think that's really what you're right. It's a different form of teaching. It's not exactly the same as, right, American Sailing Association type of course, and they both serve their role. But I think it really takes a talented person to be able to consistently pull this off, to design an experience, put you in it, and then you learn by doing, and you learn by having those conversations, and you learn by experiencing and doing a debrief. And this to me is really, really, really cool. So I like that he does it, and I like that you asked him cool questions to kind of tease this out of him. So you got a little bit of the secret sauce, and what makes these things tick. So yeah, I loved it. One of the patterns that I've seen taken away from your conversations with Joe is that he's very strategic. He's got a strategy, right? But he combines that strategy with flexibility. And I think that's one of the cool things what I'm learning about sailing is that you have to have both, right? You have to have a strategy, but you have to have flexibility, because you can't, the biggest factor is the weather, right? Pretty much, right?
Right.
And you can't control it. And then I like the way he runs his business too. It's a passion, but it's grounded in common sense, you know? So these are the big takeaways. I mean, lots of the cool details again about where he's gone and how he's done. And I like his rule about no peeing off the back of the boat. I think while you're moving, it's probably, you have a toilet. If you didn't have a toilet, I get it, right? But you have a toilet, okay? So I think that's really cool. But I think it's great. Hopefully we can keep Joe kind of as a regular on the podcast and learn from his approach and sharing his stories and kind of keep following him as he goes through his world, which is a lot different from the sailing that you do, right?
Yes.
Which is, I think it's a great contrast.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, you think we should wrap this one up, Mike?
Yeah, looking at my watch, I think it's about time. So thanks, listeners, for joining us for another episode, Sailing the East. We hope you found our conversation with Joe Hagen interesting and thought-provoking like we did. As always, if you have questions about what we've discussed, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast, that's all one word, @gmail.com.
So if you enjoyed the podcast, hit that follow button on your podcasting app and tell your friends about us as well. And if you know of someone that would be a good guest on the show, let us know. Hey, spring is around the corner. Pretty soon we'll have the boat back in the water. So signing off until next time from cold and snowy upstate New York. See you all soon.
Sounds great, Bela. Looking forward to hearing about getting your boat back in the water. I'm sure you can't wait. But from over here in Münster, Germany, where it's not too cold, but it's definitely cloudy and drizzly. We'll see everybody next time.